Okay, welcome back. It is 5/15 of 2015. We get a chance to take a look at Ricoeur and his introductory comments now. We've looked at Lacocque, and in this chapter we switch over to Ricoeur and his introductory comments. And we'll take it in small segments again, so we can kind of internalize as we go. And Ricoeur wants to start out by discussing the triad of creation history. And he said that'll be a three-point process through historical events, to the account of historical events as narrative, and then on from event and narrative combining to form the coming to existence of actualizing the drama of creation. So he begins with historical events, and he says the problem is that of coordinating the primordial time and historical time, the two different creation narratives that we have, the Adam primordial history and the Abraham temporal history, that seek coordination. But for Ricoeur, they are enclosed within a Urgeschichte salvation history. He uses a German scholarship here, of course. But an Urgeschichte salvation history encloses these two historical narratives. But in Genesis 2 and 3, creation is primarily fabrication. God does not create out of nothing. The deep, the darkness, and the primordial waters are already in existence. And creation includes a notion of multiple beginnings. And furthermore, we should not assimilate the creation narrative into the idea of documentary history, which was prevalent in during Solomon's monarchy when the creation narratives were written, the creation narrative of Genesis 2 and 3. So creation narrative equals an ordered multiplicity of events of an intelligent unity. They are ordered by a Geschebensbogen arc of unity. Again, he goes to German scholarship here. But there's an arc of unity that encloses the multiplicity of events and gives them an intelligible unity. So a creative event equals a whole sequence with an internal intended unifying trajectory of a coming to existence. And he says this is especially exemplified in the creation of the human condition. That's his primary example of how this trajectory is an eschatological creation, which is aiming toward a coming to existence. Now the creative event becomes narrated for us, and so in the second moment he says the primordial events are provided a narrative overlap in Genesis 2 and 3. Genesis 1 is a didactic poem and not a narrative, but Genesis 2 and 3 gives us a narrative overlap. Other creation sources include the Psalm creation hymns and the Hellenistic creation narratives of 2 Maccabees 7:25-29. So narratives, poems, and hymns are pooled together to take into account the succession of events, but then we fall back on a prioritized narrative form, because the notion of global event authorizes us to prioritize literary narrative as the most adequate expression of the creation event. And so we end up with the event narratives in a second moment. Now, primordial events first appear as quasi-narrative accounts that still kind of have that intermixture of mythology. The operative models expressed in narrative are fourfold. There's generation, there's combat, there's fabrication, and there's word. Genesis 2 and 3 use the fabrication model. Obviously, Genesis 1 uses the word. However, in the Hebrew Bible, Ricoeur says that creation always remains a drama of God's will against evil and chaos. The combat backdrop drama is always prevalent. The Genesis 2:4 to 3:24 narrative reveals two half-narratives. There's the creation of humanity, and then there's a second narrative of crime and punishment, which leads to humanity losing their proximity to God, but also having access to responsibility regarding selfhood. There is a salvation history of a progression even in separation, says Ricoeur. So even though there is a separation of that loss of proximity, there is a progression in this gaining of responsibility, understanding responsibility regarding selfhood in relationship to God. So there is a progression, a salvation history progression that takes place even in spite of separation. So the first and second narratives contain basically a cycle of numbering and the four rivers of the garden, and then a garden and two trees, which is a narrative from temptation to expulsion, or the breach in creations. You have the creation and you have breach in creation as the two half narratives. The narrative from event and narrative, we move on to the coming to existence as the actualized drama of creation. And the first meaning that humanity acquires of itself is an existence at a distance, infinitude, an understanding of being a distinct work. But all the stages of creation unfold as this distinctions of separation. So creation begins for Ricoeur in its originary separation, infinitude. And originary separation looks like the following. It's a manifold reality. It is a hierarchy in organization. It is closed in on itself. That's key to understand. And that means that there are no witnesses to internalize the meaning of creation. So there's a need of the creation of humanity so that creation itself can move from its in itself status to a for itself status of being able to go out of itself and to have its meaning internalized by another. So the limitation of finitude is exemplified for us by the law concerning the eating of fruit. That constitutes the limits of finitude, and it is the primordial limit of distance between the creator and the created. And intimacy becomes narrated in terms of a distance and an understanding of the responsibility towards selfhood in relation to a God who is other than creature. There is that separation of the eternal and finitude, but there is the acquisition of responsibility. So there's a great little first introduction, just a very preliminary look, but he wants to give us his first basic introductory comments that historical event plus narrative equals coming to existence as actualized drama. So it's a very inclusive presentation. It does not conflict with Lacocque, but instead it enjoins Lacocque in dialogue. But for Ricoeur, he wants to emphasize very much the literary narrative form. That's really a prioritized element for him. So he's very much involved in looking at the creation narratives as event narratives that really explain creation as an eschatological coming to existence. And by understanding creation as an eschatological coming to existence, we can understand how separation can still be enclosed within a salvation history. So if it is an eschatological coming to existence, separation is not a finalization. Separation is enclosed within salvation history. So narrative is all about salvation history for Ricoeur. That does not conflict with Lacocque at all. He said the same thing in a different way. So we have a very good look at the preliminary moments here by Ricoeur. But I love the fact that he does give us a very specific triad of event, narrative, existence. Event, narrative, and existence. And it's always a drama. He says that the Hebrew Bible never excludes drama. Drama is always part of the backdrop. It's always part of the backdrop of the Creator, always in opposition to chaos or death. So the drama is always in the backdrop of the narrative of salvation history. Even though it might be fabrication in Genesis 2 and 3, fabrication doesn't exclude the combat element either. So Ricoeur does give us a very good breakdown of I like the fact that he included the operative models of generation. And by the way, he says generation is never a part of the Hebrew Bible. It's always a combat, fabrication, or word. It's never generation. So basically, Genesis 2 and 3 take up the fabrication model, but the combat model is never excluded. And that gives us a very good first look at Paul Ricoeur and his introductory comments on creation narrative. We just have to remember that this is a very reflexive dialogue between Lacocque and Ricoeur. So there's not really a conflict of ideas here. It's really a complementarity. They just have their own unique perspective. But Lacocque is the Hebrew expert, and Ricoeur is the hermeneutic expert. So you really just have two different perspectives, but they are engaged in a reflexive complementarity dialogue. So we certainly don't have any conflict with what we've already received from Lacocque, but we just have Ricoeur's version, which is very much centered on narrative. And of course, Ricoeur is very much centered on the idea of selfhood as the central issue and the central doctrine for Christianity. And so his interpretation of Scripture is always going to be enclosed within a hermeneutic of selfhood. He very much prioritizes that doctrine, so that's why he emphasizes the eschatological nature of the creation of the human condition. That'll wrap up his first look, which was from 31 to 41.